I've read hundreds of self-help books. My shelves are full of everything from Atomic Habits to Tony Robbins, from Stoicism to Wake Up at 5 a.m. and Your Life Will Change. And I'll be honest with you, it felt like almost nothing in my life had changed. The strange part is this. Every time I finished a book, I felt incredibly good, as if I'd accomplished something. I'd close the last page, say, okay, I've got this now, and make myself a coffee. But 6 months later, when I looked back, I was still the same person. Same procrastination, same half-finished projects, same, I'll start on Monday. And for a long time, I looked for the answer in the wrong place. I must be reading the wrong books. I said, I searched for better ones. Then I said, I must not be reading enough. And I read more. None of it worked. Because the problem wasn't the books. In fact, I want to say this clearly. The books were great. Most of them were genuinely valuable, with life-changing ideas inside. The problem wasn't in the books themselves, but in the way I was reading them, or more precisely, in the fact that I thought reading was doing. And that's what this whole video is about. At some point, reading replaced doing, and this is a much sneakier trap than you think. Think about it for a second. What happens when you open a self-help book? You say, this is exactly what I was looking for. The author gives you clear steps, gives you examples, motivates you. Your brain feels like it's moving towards something. Because learning feels good. Learning a new idea feels like you've solved a piece of the puzzle. Your brain gives you a small hit of dopamine. The problem is that this dopamine is almost the same as the dopamine you get from actually doing something. Your brain can't tell them apart. So when you read the book and say, wow, what a great idea, your brain rewards you as if you'd applied that idea. But you didn't. You only read it. And here's what happens. You feel satisfied. That satisfaction kills the very sense of incompleteness that would have pushed you to act. The moment you feel like the job is done, the need to actually do it disappears. Let me tell you about one of my early books. In high school, I read Cal Newport's Deep Work, and I was completely mesmerized. I immediately drew out a whole system in a notebook, a phone box, focus blocks, everything color-coded. I even bought a whiteboard for my room. That night, I went to bed feeling like the most disciplined person in the world. A week later, the whiteboard was still spotless, my phone was back in my hand, and I never opened the notebook again. The only thing that had changed in my life was that there was one more notebook in my drawer. There's actually a name for something similar in psychology. It's called the illusion of fluency. When you read something and understand it, your brain draws the wrong conclusion. I know this now. I can do it. But understanding something and being able to do something are two completely different muscles. It's like reading a swimming book and then drowning when you jump into the pool. Reading the information isn't the same as embedding it into your body, but your brain keeps whispering, you already know this, relax. And there's one more layer. Reading a book is safe. Nobody talks about this, but it's the truth. You can't fail when you're reading a book. There's no risk. Nobody tells you you couldn't do it. Sitting on the couch reading a success book gives you the feeling of self-improvement with zero risk. But when you actually try to do something, start a business, go to the gym, have that hard conversation, you might fail. It might hurt. So your brain picks the safe option instead. One more book. Because consuming is easy, producing is hard. Now maybe you're thinking, but I don't just read, I take notes, I highlight, I even write things in my journal. I understand. I did that for years too. But let's be honest, highlighting is also a form of consumption. In fact, it's a more dangerous form because it makes you feel like you're working. When you highlight a sentence with that yellow marker, your brain says, okay, I've got this now. But that sentence stays in your notebook and never makes it into your life. A beautiful notebook full of colorful notes is just a stylish cover hiding the fact that you've applied nothing. At one point, I was collecting everything I learned in a huge note-taking app. There were folders full of ideas. Then one day I looked back and realized I hadn't used a single one of those hundreds of notes in my life. I had built a museum, not a manual. I'm thinking of a friend, for example. Someone I knew from university, very shy, who found it incredibly hard to meet new people. To fix it, he read Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People twice. He knew the book's rules by heart. Use the other person's name, listen first, speak later. He could list them off one by one. But when we went to an event, he'd be in a corner staring at his phone. All that information was in his head, but not a millimeter of it was coming out. Because he had read the book, but he had never once put it into practice. By the way, if this video has felt familiar so far, you're probably in this trap too, and you need someone to talk through it with. I make videos like this regularly, so if you think they'll help, hit subscribe and let's keep going, because the real point starts now. Now, I want to underline something very important here, because most people miss this point. Every book is essentially a general map. The author sat down, took the lessons they'd gathered over years, and wrote them in a way that speaks to millions of different people at the same time. So that book was written for everyone, but not specifically for you. It doesn't know your job, your relationships, your fears, your daily schedule. And here's the step that gets skipped: taking the idea from the book and translating it into your own life. The author says this, okay, but what does it look like in my life? Where and how exactly do I apply this tomorrow morning? Unless you do this translation work, even the best book in the world will just hang in the air around you. Because a book gives you raw material. You're the one who has to shape it to fit your life. Let me give you a very simple example. Two people read the same book, let's say one about discipline. One finishes the book, says, wow, what great ideas, and puts it back on the shelf. The other one pauses at every chapter and thinks, okay, the author says this, but how does this show up in my morning? Grab my phone the moment I wake up, so maybe I can put my phone on the other side of the room. 2 weeks later, the first person has forgotten the book entirely. The second has changed one small thing, and that change has become permanent in their life. Same book, same pages, two completely different outcomes. The only difference is that one of them translated the idea into the language of their own life. The book gave both of them the same thing, only one of them used it. And customizing alone isn't enough either. You have to actually live with that idea for a certain stretch of time, not once. Not for a day, for weeks. Because a habit or a way of thinking only starts to mean something to you when you've lived with it for a while. The first few days always feel strange. You always say, maybe this isn't for me. But the real change begins right where that strangeness wears off. Trying something once and saying it didn't work is not trying. Reading the book, customizing the idea to your life, then living with it long enough, the real work hides in those three. If you don't do this, everything you read just stays a collection of nice sentences. And the most painful part is this. The more you think you've learned something, the less hungry you are to actually apply it. A beginner says, I know nothing, I have to try, and they try. But someone who's read 50 books says, I already know this topic, and never tries. Knowledge, instead of pushing you into action, turns into a comfortable pillow. And because that pillow is so comfortable, you can spend years sleeping in the same spot. I experienced this most clearly with entrepreneurship. For years, I read dozens of books, watched videos, and took notes on starting a business, sales, and marketing. At the table, I sounded more knowledgeable than anyone. If someone told me their idea, I'd immediately analyze it and tell them what they were doing wrong. But here was the truth. I had never spoken to a single customer. I had never sent a single message, never had an offer I could point to and say, I do this work for this price. Meanwhile, a friend of mine who knew nothing about any of this had already found his first customer, started with a clumsy, half-baked service, and had been quietly growing it for 2 years. His pricing was wrong, his work was messy, but he had money coming in, he had customers. I was full of books, and he was years ahead of me. That's the moment I understood. Reading had made me knowledgeable, but it hadn't moved me an inch forward. So how do we break this? Because my goal isn't to send you off saying don't read books. Books are great, I still read. The issue isn't books, it's the relationship you have with them. For me, one single rule changed the game, and I'll share it. It's this: never try to take more than one thing from a book. When you finish a book, pick just one actionable thing from it. Just one. And don't open the next book until you've customized that one thing to your own life and tried it for a while. Sounds too simple, doesn't it? But that's exactly why it works. Because 200 ideas in a notebook are nothing. One idea applied is everything. Imagine taking 30 pages of notes from Atomic Habits. Nothing changes. But if you took just, I'll lay out my clothes the night before and put my gym bag by the door from that book and actually did it for a few weeks, your life would change. One sentence put into practice is worth more than every book you've ever read. Second thing, if you don't start trying what you read within 48 hours, you probably never will. That first wave of excitement, that wow moment, is very short-lived. You have to turn it into a small action immediately, or it evaporates. So the moment you close the book, you have to ask yourself, okay, when am I going to try this today or tomorrow? What time? Any idea that stays abstract is a stillborn idea. And starting small is critical here. Most people finish a book and try to change everything at once. New routine, new diet, new sleep schedule, all on the same Monday. 3 days later, it collapses. Then they say, I just can't do it, and buy another book for comfort. Whereas one ridiculously small change, 2 pages a day, a 5-minute walk, a glass of water actually transforms you because you can keep doing it. Big plans excite us, but small steps transform us. I remember very clearly the first book I did this with on purpose. It was yet another productivity book. Normally, I would have taken dozens of notes and forgotten them all. But that time I promised myself, I will take one thing, nothing else. The thing I picked was ridiculously small. Every night before bed, I'd write the single most important task for the next day on a small piece of paper and leave it on my desk. That was it. At first I thought, this is it? But 3 weeks later, I wasn't scattered in the mornings anymore, wondering what should I do. The answer was already waiting for me on my desk. What 30 books couldn't do for me, one small piece of paper did. And finally internalize this. Self-improvement is actually boring. Reading books is exciting, new ideas are exciting, the feeling of I'm going to change my life is exciting. But real change? Real change is boring. It's repeating the same thing over and over when nobody is clapping and no results are visible. Nothing changes the first day you go to the gym. Not much changes on the 30th day either. But a year later, you're a completely different person. No book can live that year for you, only you can. Books give you the map, but you're the one who has to walk the road, and nobody can walk it for you. That's the whole point. If you've read hundreds of books and nothing has changed, it doesn't mean you're lazy or untalented, and it doesn't mean the books are bad. It just means you never took those valuable ideas, translated them into your own life, and lived with them long enough. You were winning the consumption game, but you weren't even playing the game of changing your life. They're two different games. So after you close this video, I'm going to ask you for one thing: don't open a new book. Instead, take one idea you remember from a book you've already read, turn it into a small step that fits your life, and start trying it in the next 48 hours. Not once, keep it up for a few days, see what happens. Because the real lesson is this: read, but pause, think, translate it to fit you, and test it. Keep what works, drop what doesn't. Real self-improvement is that simple and that hard. If you like this and these kinds of videos interest you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. See you.